All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, as we're going to discuss a lot today, the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg less than 50 days before the 2020 election has dramatically increased the stakes of this election. It's exactly the type of September surprise which could scramble Americans' voting patterns this late in the game. But one thing it underscores to me is how much this sucks, how we're all getting played by the elites of this country who have designed the system exactly this way in order to remove the illusion of choice from our lives. Let me explain. Right now, if you're pro-life or pro-choice or pro-gun or anti-gun or pro or con, whatever your divisive social issue is, you basically have a gun to your head. If you're culturally conservative and you want a chance at preserving the courts, and you should probably vote for Trump. And if you're culturally progressive and you want your agenda codified and expanded into law, you should probably vote for Joe Biden. And I want to be clear, that is the reality of the situation. Many millions of people are going to act accordingly on November 3rd. But why the hell is it that way? Why? Well, because starting in the 1970s, Congress decided to make an explicit choice. You see, debating abortion and gay marriage and guns and all these other issues is really hard. And Congress hates doing hard things because then they might have to answer for them to you, the voters, at the ballot box. So both parties embrace the same strategy. Kick everything to the courts. Kick it all. Abortions, guns at first. But then, hey, what about Obamacare, Citizens United, the Keystone XL pipeline, antitrust law? So now we live under one of the greatest cons that is perpetuated upon the American people in all of our history. We are now held completely hostage to our respective cultural values and forced to vote for people based upon a vote that they will take a few times in a 6-year term in the United States Senate. Supreme Court confirmation is not even close to what these people spend the bulk of their time on. They also do things like, craft economic recovery bills, stimulus payments during the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Just very mild, unimportant things like that. And every single one of these senators knows something else too. At the end of the day, if you're mad at them, you're still probably going to vote for them if you agree with them on social issues. Why? Because they're going to cast that vote for a Supreme Court justice who will rule the way that we want on public policy. They can screw us all day long economically. They can deny you your stimulus payments. They can let the country rot. They can vote to keep more troops in Afghanistan. But come voting time, they can come back to the district and they can claim to have delivered on their promise to vote the right way on the U.S. Supreme Court. In our current system, we have dozens of GOP senators who claim to be pro-life and pro-family, but who refuse to go out of their way to improve people's lives and conditions to a point where they can have children in the first place. And the ones who call themselves pro-choice and say they're all for inclusivity and the biggest feminists on the planet, what they really mean is they're all for more female CEOs and inclusivity at the head of Wall Street banks or Silicon Valley venture capital funds. But it's not just their fault. It's also the media's. During Justice Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation, try and remember exactly what it was like even before Christine Blasey Ford. It was all abortion all the time. It was Susan Collins pressing Kavanaugh on Roe versus Wade. That was the main drama. To the extent that there was coverage of anything else, it was immigration. But that is only because DACA was in the news at the time. If it hadn't been, I'm absolutely certain there would not have been pieces about it at all. Or look at today. Trump has said that he will likely nominate a woman to the Supreme Court. It's widely known in Washington one of the frontrunners for the seat is Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Well, the very first piece the Times writes about her in 2017, what do you think it was? Abortion and religious issues, of course. And in the very first story that the Times writes about the frontrunners to replace Ginsburg, they say of Barrett that she is a, quote, favorite of the anti-abortion conservatives. The elite media plays the same game as our politicians. They're obsessed with race and identity and social issues because that is what our wealthy elites want us to be fighting about. Because under the smokescreen, they can go forward and do literally anything they want as long as you're distracted. What do any of us know about the public discourse, about where Judge Barrett falls on antitrust? What did any of us know about Justice Kavanaugh's position on corporate power, or Sotomayor for that matter, or Kagan? I am just so sick of having to fall into this trap every single time. The trick that helps corporatists in Congress the most is making every single election existential. Why? Because when things are existential, then everything else goes out the window. How Wall Street conducts business, how large Amazon is, the growing wealth gap in America, the size of student loan debt, the inability for American families to provide for their families, get married, have have children. They all go on the back burner in so-called existential times. A common theme of this show and my own personal politics is this. Corporate power can be just as much, if not more so today, a threat to your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as a tyrannical government can. So what I'm asking all of you to do is to start developing some litmus tests of your own. And I don't just mean personally. I mean with your money and with your advocacy and with your vote. Because I actually believe that the stakes of our economic future and the ability for people to provide for themselves are existential, and that it's time that we start acting and fighting like it. The only way to do so is to treat issues like our economic future as existential to the social values that govern our lives. That is a tall order, I realize. To the religious right, this sounds like moral equivalence on something where it simply does not exist. To the progressive left, it sounds like you're willing to sacrifice any individual's chance at a future in favor of making life better for some or others. But I would posit once again that at a time like this, we've actually never had more to lose, and that as citizens, we deserve a chance to vote for someone for something other than a single vote that they're going to take on the bench, and instead to take on issues that can literally determine how we live every second of our lives. And you know, Crystal, that was all I could really think about, was how they have created this system where they pass off not just abortion, not just guns, now Obamacare. Think about the central Republican tenet for destroying Obamacare was not to repeal and replace it in Congress. It was destroyed at the Supreme Court. Same thing on DACA. Yeah. Same thing. I mean, it's like, no, we elected you people for a reason. Hash it out. Create it, do something in Congress. Pass it if you really believe it. Take your votes. Come up with the compromise. In our history, that is how we have dealt with every divisive issue of our time, except until the 1970s. And so now, look at where we are. If you're on the left, you're like AOC and Chuck Schumer doing press conferences together. On the right, there's really no difference between a Josh Hawley and a Mitch McConnell whenever it comes to this. Why? Because it's all divided on social lines. Mm-hmm. And so these Mitch McConnell types and Ron Johnson and Pat Toomey can go back to their districts or their states and they can say, look, I know you don't like what I did on the economy, but I voted for Kavanaugh. And that's it. They're good, right? Yep. And it's like, that's one thing. That's one vote that they took. What about for the rest of the 5 years that you were in the United States Senate? We deserve to actually have some conversation about that, but we won't. And it's the media's fault, it's the politicians' fault, and we're all just getting played.
The person who understands this better than any other individual is Mitch McConnell.
Oh, yeah.
Having lived in Kentucky and hearing like what he goes and says to voters in Kentucky day in and day out when he speaks publicly, it is all 100%, almost 100% about the courts. And look, people there don't like him. He has one of the lowest approval ratings of any senator in the entire country among his own constituents. But they keep electing him, and they'll reelect him this year easily, especially against Amy McGrath, again and again and again, because of exactly this hardening political divide where that's it. Look, you may not like what they did on the CARES Act. You may not like the fact that, they passed the corporate tax bill. You may not like the fact that they attacked union rights. You may not like all those things. But at the end of the day, when you've made the Supreme Court so central and the stakes so existential, people feel like they have no other choice but to line up behind, quote unquote, their team. And it's also easy for legislators. Like, the culture war is easy because you don't actually have to do anything. You don't actually have to pass anything.
You just say
if you just rhetorically signal to your team in the right tribal way, that's all people really ultimately want and need and get out of that whole approach to politics. And so that's exactly where we are today. And we were talking earlier, like, it's easy to forget how recently in the past things were different.
Yes.
How recently in the past the idea was, presidents on the Democratic and the Republican side would try to put forward nominees who they thought could win bipartisan support, that there was sort of like a deference from the opposition party towards those nominees in order to maintain this idea that the Supreme Court would be kind of unpredictable, right? The Supreme Court is not going to be unpredictable anymore. It's moving very much in the direction of just like an extension of our politics. We're basically already there, where it's completely tribal and completely polarized. And so, in that situation, a normal political event like a Supreme Court vacancy becomes an utter catastrophic crisis.
Mm-hmm. And they should never have created it this way. What they should have done is what they should be doing is make it so that when we vote for our legislators, we can be assured that they're actually going to deal with the things that they claim are existential.
Yeah.
But they have no interest in doing so. They want it to be the courts. They want to make sure that none of us actually get a say with our vote for them, that they'll actually do anything about it. You kick it to somebody else, then you're never accountable for it before Congress. And like I said, now your vote, it does matter. It matters a lot. I don't want to sit here and lie, but it shouldn't have to be that way. And it wasn't for so many years. They created it and designed it this way such that every single one is an all-out war or not, when in reality it should be about actually sending our legislators to go and deal with our problems, compromise with each other, whatever, and then actually pass a bill. And there are certain ways, and we can talk about it as the weeks go on, in order to actually force them to do so. But until then, they've won. They locked us into the system. That's how you are dramatically unpopular and you get reelected every single time, because you actually don't really give people a choice. And that's the fakery of the system as a whole.
And that's how you end up with like a nominee like Joe Biden, who's like, nothing's going to fundamentally change. And almost no one is actually voting for that guy for his policy. No one at this point is even voting for Donald Trump for his policy. It's the same thing. I saw one of those bumper stickers over the weekend that said, any sane adult 2020. Yeah. And I was like, how sad is that? Yeah. That's like where our politics have gotten, that the bar is so low that because of this sense of an existential stakes, you will literally support anyone. Joe Biden, Michael Bloomberg, John Kasich, Scott Walker. Like, it doesn't matter. Whoever it is, you will get behind them if they're going to oppose the other team, because that's all that ultimately matters here.
All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.